My deconstruction from a conservative evangelical church began in my freshman year at Indiana University when I took a course in the New Testament, which severely challenged the idea that the Bible is completely inerrant. That was something that I took to my pastor, and when I found my pastor could not help me with that, I felt a tremendous sense of shock and betrayal. And I was really struggling. I didn't know what to do or where to go or where to get help. Didn't know who to talk to about it. At the same time, something else happened while I was at IU that got my attention and began to gnaw at the idea that my church was the only true church. A couple of afternoons a week at IU in the main part of the campus, some fundamentalist preachers came. They wore dark suits, ties, very formal looking, and they carried these great big old Bibles, the kind that have the gold edges and all that kind of stuff. And they would stand out there on the green right about the time that classes let out from some particular courses, and there were a whole lot of people walking by. And they would wave those Bibles at the people walking by and shout that this place is a den of iniquity, and you all are going to hell, and God is going to rain down his punishment upon you. And of course, I was one of those passers-by, and it got my attention. I thought, well, you all are going to the wrong church. You're going to hell, at first. But then they kept doing it 2 afternoons a week, just almost like clockwork. They were there. Sometimes the kids would just ignore them and go on. But a lot of the times, they would get a small crowd of kids around that would listen a little bit. And then sometimes some kids would come by and start complaining about them, yelling stuff back at them, even cursing at them. And it was the first time I'd ever seen someone react negatively to a so-called religious proclamation. And it was just, it really unnerved me, and yet pried open my mind at the same time. They would end up, both groups, virtually shouting at each other. And the students, were cursing at the preachers. But in a way, if the preachers were shouting at people walking by them that they'd never met before in their life, telling them they were going to hell, weren't the preachers cursing at the students too? Now, none of us there were free from sin. At the time, IU was known, and perhaps somewhat proudly known, as a party school. And those kids made mistakes. I made mistakes too, but I will wager that some of those preachers had made mistakes in their lives, maybe some of the mistakes the students had made. And so it turned into just one big angry shouting match from time to time. And it troubled me greatly. It hit me that what was needed in that group of people was a lot more love on both sides. Our church never did things like that. Our people were loving people. But at the same time, we would talk about hell quite a bit. And a big emphasis was you avoid hell by doing certain things and by keeping a perfect or near perfect life. And I knew I wasn't doing that. And when I saw those crowds at IU shouting at each other, it made me realize that this idea of leading with the fear of hell wasn't the right way to go about it. There were kids, I'm sure, in those crowds that needed a little more love in their lives, that were searching for something. That's why some of the kids stopped and listened a little bit. Was that the right message that those kids needed in that moment? And some of those kids were so turned off by the preachers waving the Bibles at them, quoting selected biblical texts and shouting they were all going to hell, that had probably never been exposed to religion before, it probably said to them, if that's what religion is, if that's what the Bible is all about, I don't want anything to do with it. It almost vaccinated them against ever taking religion seriously again. That really caused me to think about what I was taught in church. And that combined with the idea of biblical inerrancy being challenged made me think more deeply about what faith should be, what is the message of the Bible for people, and how do we reach out to someone who needs love in their lives. At the same time, I felt so betrayed by my own church. I just didn't know what to do or where to go. We'll talk more about that next week.